Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the um, Future for Future Earth South Asia Regional Center. I'm really privileged and honored to be part of this session. I'm sorry that I could not join in the morning due to an urgent work, which just came very late. So this whole theme of this conference or webinar on the Sustainable Development Goals in South Asia, I find, and I would also thank for selecting such an issue, which is very crucial, particularly during the time we are passing through. So the topic which I'm given to talk about is macroeconomic policy in South Asia, integrating social and environmental protection. I will just focus on a few aspects during my 15 minutes of intervention. Of course, this is a very vast issue because when you talk about macroeconomic policy, the landscape is quite vast. So just to begin with, to give a context that how South Asia has been doing in terms of economic and social and also environmental aspects during the pre-COVID period. Of course, COVID has changed everything because it has not only shattered the economic progresses which the world has made, but it also has reversed some of the important achievements that we had made during during several decades actually. So on economic area, on social area, and also on environmental areas. For example, the issue which we are dealing with today, that is the Sustainable Development Goals in case of SDGs, and prior to that, Millennium Development Goals. The countries have made so much progress, and particularly I can talk about Bangladesh's achievement also. My fellow speakers are there and they can also contribute to that, Bangladesh has been a stellar performer in case of MDG achievement and also in case of SDGs achievements. Not only in case of higher economic growth, which has led to reduction of poverty, and also led to achievement of many social indicators in case of women's empowerment, then reduction of maternal and child mortality. So all these have been very, visible in our development traits. But unfortunately, because of this wrath of the COVID-19, many of these achievements are now being challenged. So South Asia is no exception. So having said that, if we also look back or reflect on some of the patterns of South Asian economic growth, because we are dealing with macroeconomic policy in this session, in my talk particularly. So of course, South Asia has been one of the better performers when you look at other regions of the world. It not only made a reasonable rate of growth, but also could maintain some amount of macroeconomic stability. So through growth, in case of other macro indicators, for example, inflation or investment to some extent. So, and also the trade balances on all these, some amount of macro stability had been observed, and which had given the strength of these economies. But if you also look at the other side of the coin, that what kind of growth had been achieved in the region, I think, this is a general discussion I'm making because it's, of course, every country is different. Even within South Asia, we have homogeneity in many areas, but also we have to remember there are also differences in these areas. Within South Asia, there are countries which are developing country, which are least developed country, which are landlocked countries. So we can't really also make general statement, but overall, if we just if we put a snapshot of the summary of economic development and its inherent features, I would say that despite some sort of reasonable growth, there are weaknesses in case of inequality. Of course, you can say that inequality is a global phenomena, and the whole world, if you look at the nature of global economic growth, inequality is a challenge. Every year we find reports by many organizations which shows that how the resource distribution is skewed, and it is widening, unfortunately, and South Asia is no different. And also we have also seen that there has been structural transformation, of course, from agriculture to manufacturing to services, and for higher employment generation, services sectors and manufacturing, these are the sectors which can contribute much more. But we have also seen probably South Asia has been going through a sort of uh, early stagnation of the manufacturing sector. That is, before it reached its peak, it could not, it didn't, it just stagnated at some point, in the sense that it is not able to create enough jobs. If you look at other developed countries or the development pattern, the contribution of the manufacturing sector at one point in time in terms of contributing to generating employment, that is not so much in case of South Asia, even including countries like Bangladesh and India. Also, there have been a lot of studies. In fact, we have also done a study, and a book has been published recently. I mean, not recently, 2 years back, I remember. So where the industrialization pattern has been observed within the South Asia. And one important findings of that study has been that the manufacturing sector is not performing as it has to perform. The other area of weaknesses is that the investment, the expedition of investment, both public and private investment, particularly for private investment, is so important for generation of employment. And also the other aspect is the issue of environmental and climate change related challenges. Of course, these are some of these challenges which are related to climate change. Those are external challenges, and countries, Bangladesh and also all the South Asian countries, do not, in many areas, do not have much to do with that. Of course, India being a large economy and investment are being made in power generation at a higher rate, it also has some contribution towards climate change. But for other countries, the contribution of, for example, carbon emission is so low. So compared to other regions, so this region's contribution is lower. But even then, these countries are vulnerable to the impact, and there has been a need for following a green economic growth. The other, the last point of the growth pattern, I would say that's overarching, and that is the issue of governance. So it's a cross-cutting issue, be it for macroeconomic policy or climate-related policy or sectoral policy. So there are weaknesses in governance which are being observed in these countries, in the countries within the South Asian region. Now, in view of these contexts, this context of both economic achievements and also the weaknesses, now, as we are passing through the time of pandemic, we are talking about building back better or building forward better. Now, if we are we have to, if we have to think of building forward better, so some of these weaknesses that I have mentioned, those have to be changed, those have to be removed and reversed, in fact. So since my issues here is related to social and environmental protection. So I would just go directly to these aspects, which has strong linkages with macroeconomic policies, because when you talk about macroeconomic policies, then one for both social and environmental protect, one issue is related to these two areas is fiscal policy, because when we talk about social protection or social progress, we have seen that the South Asian countries, those countries have made um, important achievements, but there are a lot to do, because this is also a region where a huge number of poor people live. So in order to do that, in order to reduce poverty, in order to bring them, many of those people uh, under the labor market, and also create opportunities. So the government has to come forward, government has to provide various sort of supports through fiscal policies. And for social protection, when you talk about social protection for the people who are marginalized, who are poor, who are youth, but who are young, but they don't have access to the labor market, or women. So the main objective of the macroeconomic policy should be employment generation. Of course, as I have mentioned, that private sector is the major source of employment generation, but the government has a role to play when there are some limitations. For example, when you talk about social safety net, expansion of social safety net, universal health care, universal education, universal social safety net. So these are the responsibility of the government, and I think the government can address these issues through macroeconomic policies. Um, uh, the the other areas related to fiscal policy is, of course, expenditure or public investment, public expenditure is one aspect. But in order to make higher public investment or public expenditure for social outcome, better social outcome, the government has to have fiscal space. So emphasis on higher domestic resource mobilization is so important, and for that, so that fiscal space is created for making more investment. But we have also seen that in many of the South Asian countries and many countries across the world, also particularly in the low-income countries, least developed countries, domestic resource mobilization has been a challenge. In case of Bangladesh, it has also been a challenge because it's one of the lowest in the world. So it is below 10% of GDP. So in fact, in other South Asian countries also, it has to be expedited so that the government has more space, more leverage to make investment on the social empowerment, social protection. The I would also, with regard to the environmental protection, I would also bring the issue of fiscal policy and fiscal space. In case of environmental protection, when you talk about the fiscal policies, taxation, subsidies, incentive, these policies have direct environmental implications. These have direct implications for sustainable resource management and, in the end, sustainable development. For example, taxes on some of the sectors, particularly the extractive natural resources, for example, natural gas, fisheries, forestries. So if these are not taxed or priced properly, then there is a tendency for overuse. So that's why the pricing is important. In environmental economics, usually the price of a resource or a product is calculated in a manner that includes private cost of production plus the cost of externality, because each and every product we produce that has a cost that creates, maybe it can increase our welfare, material welfare, but also it creates some sort of negative externality. For example, when you construct a factory, for example, by cutting forest, of course, it creates employment, it creates income for the poor people, but it also, reduces forests and the intrinsic value of a natural resource, that is forestry, that is lost. And unless we replace it at a rate which is much more higher. That is not happening in South Asia. Overall, in many countries, the deforestation rate is very, very high. In case of Bangladesh, per capita forest cover fell by an annual rate of 1.8% during 1990 and 2015, which is quite high. There have been, of course, efforts, but it's still not adequate. Similar is the issue of natural gas, for example. I mean, once upon a time, we had a lot of we had a comfortable level of natural gas, but that it is firstly, it is an exhaustible resource unless there is the new invention, new find. So that's why it's depleting, and also not only depleting, the higher, if it is cheaper, then there is this tendency of using it more in an inefficient way, and it also leads to higher carbon emission because then we tend to use more fuel oil for our own production or running vehicles and all. Same goes for fisheries, so if it is not priced properly, or the fishing rights or property rights are not fixed, then property rights is not also managed in a way that some of the rights of which would be of the government's responsibility. Government has to monitor and supervise, and it should not be many of the fishing areas where private rights are implemented, but in not only in case of private rights, but also when it is open property rights, there is also a tendency of overfishing. So this is again this is again a resource which depletes, which has to be regenerated. And not only that, it also creates excessive fishing that also contributes to pollution, water pollution, for example. So this is a whole huge change. So pricing plays a very important role in case of natural resources and environmental resources. So now,
Fahmida,
I will wrap up. Yes, I'll just wrap up. There are many, many examples of this, but what I would, in the end, is say that the objective of macro policy are twofold. It should be twofold in the new perspective of the whole development paradigm. The first one is to achieve economic stabilization. And the second one is related to this social and environmental objective. It should be coupled with distributional equity and also inclusive growth, which includes universal education, social protection, healthcare, and all. So that's why some of these goals, some of the macro economic goals sometimes are short run or medium run, but we have to actually focus on the long-term implications of the growth, because the traditional growth concept does not cover the long-term welfare concept. And this welfare is achievable only if we can focus on social progress and environmental related progress. So the government has a very important role, and we have seen that during the COVID also, how the state had to come forward, and in the end it is the government which has to make a choice between the short-term objectives versus the and long-term objectives. So we should not get diluted between the short-term goals versus the long-term goals while we talk about social and environmental issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Fahmida, so much for your insights on that, on macroeconomic policies and relations with social protection and environmental protection in the South Asian region.